Great. Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning for our online webinar, The Human Cost of Poor Financial Literacy. I'm delighted to be joined by you all. I think for those watching live, a special mention for joining us this morning. Thank you. After the excitement and disappointment of yesterday evening, really pleased that you're here with us today. I'm Catherine McColl. I'm the Director of Research Consultancy and Insight at Everfi, and we're an international education company focused on driving social change through education and enabling us and our partners and sponsors to have a positive impact on some of the most challenging issues in society. And financial education is one of the themes we're most passionate about and which we work to address with partners and sponsors, offering free courses to schools and to workplaces and other individuals. As a result, I'm delighted to be joined today, to be joined by you all today, and to be talking about this topic in more detail, and to be thinking about the impact of poor financial literacy and really why it's important in current society and today. I'm joined by a fantastic and hugely experienced panel. I'm really looking forward to hearing their views on the topics that we're discussing today. And also our researchers at Everfi have been conducting interviews with young people to understand their experiences of good and bad financial literacy and to understand what difference that has made to their lives. So we'll be sharing some of those insights throughout the discussion as well. So today, the panel, I'm very, very pleased to be joined by David Marlowe, the Chief Executive of the Nottingham Building Society, Professor Andy Limer, a Professor of Taxation and Personal Finance at Aston University Business School, and Russell Winnard, the Director of Programmes and Services at Young Enterprise. So I'm going to hand over to each of those to introduce themselves and to explain a bit about their experience and expertise, and also why they feel so passionately about this subject. David.
Morning, Catherine. Morning, everybody. As Catherine said, I'm David Marlowe. I am the Chief Executive of the Nottingham Building Society. We have a network of 48 branches across 9 counties in the Midlands and the east of the country, but we are starting to begin to build a larger sort of footprint of digital customers who are a lot younger. We're delighted to have nearly 60,000 people with us saving for their first home, demonstrating that there is good engagement to some degree amongst the younger population saving for the future. And as you might probably not be surprised, the key element around a building society is to get people to think about the future and save for the future, predominantly to buy their first home, but increasingly for other purposes, whether that's an emergency safety net or thinking about the future. And I think it's really in terms of thinking about the future that the subject of financial literacy is so important, not just today, but for the next 10, 20, 30 years time. And it's something that we're very, very passionate about in terms of wanting to help educate and allow people to understand more about what they need to do to save for the future. The landscape ahead is very, very challenging for people, and I think it's the responsibility of people like ours to make that really clear to people about what is ahead. If we look at today and look at the average state pension and the amount of money which is available, if you look at the pension provision for people retiring today, it is far in excess of what it's going to be in 20, 30 years. And it's a fact, it's not politics, that the state, the welfare state, is not going to be able to provide anywhere near the level of coverage for pension savings in 30 years' time as it does today. In fact, the government's actuary says that the state pension is only likely to cover less than 50% of standard expenses by the year 2050. And that means that people are going to have to be far more self-sufficient and plan ahead themselves. And that is the population who are in their teens and 20s and 30s today. And we're very, very passionate about making sure that we do our bit to help and educate and give accessibility to content and encourage the government to put financial education right in the middle of the curriculum, because it's going to be an incredibly important life skill for younger people. So delighted to be here today, Catherine, to play a part in that challenge.
Thank you very much, David. Andy.
Hi, thank you very much, Catherine. Good morning, everybody. I'm a professor at a university, Aston University in Birmingham, and have been researching and looking at all aspects of young people, children and young people's financial education for more than 20 years now. Unfortunately, I think that we haven't made the progress that I would like to have seen, and many people would like to have seen over that time. And many of the issues that I see in my research and I read in other people's work is still the same today as we were seeing some years ago, even though, as David has already said, financial education is now on the national curriculum. But we're not still seeing children leaving school with the range of knowledge and education and ability to apply that knowledge in the right time and in the right ways that we would like to see. And that's creating long-lasting problems. And we know that many of the skills that children learn affect what actually happens to people in adulthood. Those skills and those lessons and that knowledge that they take from school can continue to be applied throughout their adult life. And so getting some of those that understanding in place at a young age is absolutely critical. And I would argue it's almost never too young to actually start introducing children to the ideas of money and how money works. In gentle ways when they're young, but in ways that will give them some of those skills and those abilities to make confident decisions about money. And I'd like to highlight the difference between financial literacy and financial capability. Actually, we've used the term financial literacy for this webinar, but in a strict sense, literacy is about having the skills, having the knowledge, and that's important and difficult to gather and get, as we've just said. But actually, I would like to see people have financial capability, which is the next stage beyond that, not only having that knowledge and skills, but also know when to actually apply it in the right time, have the right motivations to make decisions, to not let inertia get in the way of the fear of making the wrong decision, stopping people doing something that will actually be to their benefit. But also having the right attitudes, getting support, knowing where they can get advice and help, being able to do so at the time at which they need it, and recognizing where the limits of their knowledge are, and making sure that they get trusted advice, be it from parents who are good. Many parents are really good at giving financial education. Sadly, not all, but many of them are, from their teachers, and after they leave school, getting the right advice and knowing when to do that. So I think that balance of developing financial capability and understanding the impact of not gaining the right advice at the right time is really important, and something I'd like to develop in today's conversation. Thank you, Catherine.
Great, thank you. And Russell.
Thanks, Catherine, and good morning, everybody. So I'm Russell Winard. I'm Director of Programs and Services at Young Enterprise, and Young Money is our financial education brand. So some of you may be aware of Young Money, or you may be aware of a predecessor called PFEG, the Personal Finance Education Group, that merged into Young Enterprise way back in 2014. And my involvement in financial education, probably similar to Andy's, extends around 20 years. Starting as a teacher, a science teacher, who was suddenly given this new financial studies qualification to teach post-16 learners. And that really opened my eyes in a very, very big way to the challenges that young people face around the understanding of money and finance, and the misconceptions that there are, and the consequences of some of those misconceptions, even to young people aged 17, 18, 19. I saw some of those difficulties as a result of not being informed around choices that were being made. And that really got me quite interested in money and finance, and thinking about the implications on young people, which is when I started looking to go into the charity sector. And PFEG, that was the organisation that I went into, and I worked with hundreds, if not thousands, of schools across the country, looking at how financial education could become an embedded part of that school curriculum, training teachers, embedding into subject areas, and really making financial education part of that whole school process. as part of PFEG and now as part of Young Enterprise and Young Money, we run something called the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Financial Education of Young People. And this, every 2 or 3 years, we'll run an inquiry. Most recently, we published one last week, which was an inquiry into primary financial education. Some of you may even have submitted written evidence. Prior to that, we've looked after children and the implication of financial education on children that are in the care system. And prior to that, and Andy referenced it, we looked at the implications of financial education being placed onto the secondary school national curriculum in England. And really a sorry state of affairs in the sense that it was placed on that curriculum in 2014. The inquiry was 2016, and there was really no noticeable difference in the quantity or quality of financial education being delivered across schools. So this is a passion of mine. I think it can make a real difference to young people. I think it is, and Andy's mentioned it, I think it is all about enabling young people to make informed choices. If you're making a choice and you are informed about that choice, then even if the choice is not one that we might agree with, if you understand you are making that choice, you understand those consequences, then it's not necessarily a wrong decision. But I think far too often young people are making ill-informed or non-informed choices around money and finance. So really looking forward to discussing it further.
Great, thank you all. And there were some really interesting themes that we want to come back to later. So you've talked there about the combination of knowledge, skills, confidence and application, and having that knowledge and being able to make informed choices and decisions at key stages in young people's lives. That's really interesting. We want to come back to that. The role of parents, where support from parents isn't there, the role of education and what good means in that context, what we're really looking for, and also the age range you've talked about as well. Really interested in exploring all of that. So lots to cover and lots of things that came out through the interviews that we did with young people as well. I want to start with the impact of poor financial literacy. What do we think the greatest impact of poor financial literacy is? And David, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, thanks, Catherine. I think I would say, what is it going to be? I think that's the thing that worries us the most is the longer run. I think there are challenges in people making poor decisions today, but if they don't have, as Andy says, both the knowledge and the capability, we're really quite fearful about how sort of financial well-being in the general population could be in 20 or 30 years' time. You know, touching back on some of those points that I made earlier about, you know, the state pension will not cover the average expenditure required for a household. So you are going to have a pension pot. I know it sounds a lot of money, but research has shown that a pension pot in 2050 is going to need to be somewhere in excess of £500,000. Whereas at the moment, the average pension pot in the UK is about £62,000. So, you know, we like numbers because we run a building society. That's two pretty stark numbers. You know, the population today is saving about 62,000 and needs to save probably 10 times that. So the impact of not having the awareness and then having the knowledge and the skills to make the right decisions and to start long-term saving are enormous. We know that they're felt every day through sort of high debt, and I'm sure that others will come on to talk about the impact of not managing finances today in terms of getting into debt that becomes unmanageable. But I think our perspective on it is to look at the long-term saving situation, because I think it is one of the things that's more easier and more actionable. Start early, a small amount, regularly saved, tucked away in the right place, you know, is the beginning of strong financial well-being. So it's not complicated in its basic element, but engaging people today to understand the impacts for them in 20 to 30 years is a massive challenge. You know, a lot of people don't like to think beyond the end of next week, but in reality, we really have to start educating our youngsters to think more clearly about it. I think it is a little bit more encouraging, if I have to say. I think we've done a lot of research amongst the younger sort of population, and we tend to find that there's a bit more engagement there than there is amongst the 40-somethings who've grown up, whose parents have had defined benefit sort of pension schemes and have seen the welfare state at its height, and so don't feel the necessary impact. So I think there is an increasing awareness amongst younger people, but it's probably not enough. And so I think there are some green shoots there. I think it's really, really important that we engage with this now, but the impact, the real significant impact, will come in 20 years' time if we don't get success in the next 5 years.
Thank you very much. Andy, do you have a perspective on what you think the greatest impact is?
I touched on this already, Catherine, I think in my introduction, that I think that we now know that financial education is important. We've known for a long time, and yet consistently, as Russell's indicated, we've got politicians through the all-party parliamentary group on financial education for young people who are consistently saying this is a problem and we must do something about it. And yet we're not. We're still seeing young people leaving schools without adequate financial education, going into their first jobs or making decisions to go into into university or other higher education and training without the knowledge to be able to make decisions. Now that could be because they're not getting the stuff in schools, but also because they're not getting that education at home. Some parents are great at including children in discussions about money. Others never talk about money at all. And you've got to talk about money with your children. You've got to give them some pocket money where you can afford to, or include them in the family decisions about how you spend money if you can't afford them to give them their own, so that they are learning how to operate. And if you don't, then don't be surprised that when they start actually having money of their own, when they start working, when they're receiving benefits and they have to make some decisions themselves, when they're not making decisions that would be the ones that you would want them to make. So getting it right in young people is absolutely critical if we really wish to make a sea change in the way in which financial education, financial literacy, financial capability develops. That does mean, of course, that the government has to do something about it. We've demonstrated that just putting it on the curriculum isn't going to solve the problem. And we've got some great stuff that's going on with organisations like Russell's. You can clearly see the financial services sector, like businesses, as David has indicated, are really up for this. And in fact, actually, most of what goes on in the UK is driven by organisations like Russell's and organisations like David's going into schools and helping teachers to actually deliver this stuff. And we can't just focus at blaming teachers for not doing this. Of course, that many teachers don't have that confidence in delivering financial education because weren't taught it themselves. It's not part of teacher education to deliver some of this. So why would they naturally have developed this necessarily unless they've got that foundation? So there needs to be some sort of interventions here that brings together people to provide that service. Otherwise, we will continue to see in the next generation some of the challenges we've seen over the last 20 or 30 years with the financial crisis. And well, we've all just gone through what has been the most financially stressful for many of the people in the UK of a generation since the Second World War. And look at the harm and the damage that's created because there isn't resilience in the UK, because people haven't learned how to manage money, or because they haven't had the resources to be able to do that effectively. We need government intervention. Otherwise, we're just going to keep reinventing this problem.
Thank you both. And there are some themes there we'll come back to in later questions as well. The research that we did, the interviews that we've been doing with young people, really resonate and reflect some of the key points you've made. So this point around, we've got the longer term scenario and impact, which some young people, David, it's very positive to hear, are thinking about and are introducing behaviours which will help them in the future and will enable them to have the savings they require to live in the future, but also around their current decision making. So we spoke to one example, a young person who now wants to buy a home, mid-20s, wants to buy a home, but suddenly doesn't know what a mortgage is, suddenly doesn't know the information they need in order to be able to get a mortgage, hasn't been provided with any information about the process that you go through, and suddenly feels like, well, if I've been told, if the deposit process, for example, and credit scores or whatever had been explained to me several years ago, I'd be in a much better position now to proceed in the future. So it feels that they are being held back. They've got to gain that knowledge now in order to be able to succeed, rather than needing that knowledge, gaining that knowledge when they needed it. And other examples about things like the student loan process, a young person saying, I just didn't know how to complete the forms, and neither did my dad. We've never done it before. I don't have older siblings. So therefore being held back from obtaining the funds they require to attend university. And it's suddenly leading to a stage of where am I going to get that money from? So I think we were finding that, as you said, it's about being able to make informed choices and having the information, the knowledge and the skills and the confidence at the right point in time to be able to make decisions. And that leads me on to a question really about how we ensure that this is available to everybody, and how do we ensure that particular groups within society are not affected more than others. So I wanted to ask you, Russell, what do you think the key challenges are in ensuring financial literacy is accessible to all young people?
I think probably the biggest challenge is ensuring that we've got those educators, whoever those educators are, whether we're talking teachers or parents or carers or youth workers, but those who will influence young people, and the young people, the research tells us that young people will begin forming their habits towards money and finance by the age of 7. Now that's been banded around for a long time now, but it's still very relevant, and that young children as young as 2 and 3 are beginning to pick up some of that learning around money and finance. So we need those educator influencers to themselves be confident in speaking about money. As Andy suggested, we need teachers in school who are trained, and that's no small thing. That's a big thing. These are not specialist financial education teachers. They will be science teachers, maths teachers, English teachers, but we need those teachers to have an understanding of money and finance and how they can build that into their subject delivery. But we need parents who are willing to give that experiential learning, which I think is so important around money, and it's really difficult to do in a school setting. We know it's not achievable, but for all parents and carers, there are some for whom there just isn't that capacity, and we need to be able to support those, but those that can, we need to support them to do so, to give pocket money if they can, to get involved in choices and spending, even if it is just going out with a small budget to the shops to buy tea for that evening. Just that process of getting involved, it supports the learning that can be done within school, which is largely theory-based, because it's just not practical to be dealing with real money in school. So combine those two, and I think you've got something that is really, really powerful. But that's a lot. You know, what I've just said there in a few minutes is a huge task, and it's a massive commitment from schools. It's a big commitment at home to make sure that you're thinking about that and engaging young people in that. And we know that not all parents are in a position to be able to do that themselves. So how do we support those households in which it is that more challenging, and maybe that there is some youth work intervention there that could potentially come through. But it has to be, in my opinion, it has to be something that is coordinated between school and home, and that will give us the greatest influence and the greatest opportunity for young people to develop.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that reiterates again a point that we were finding through the interviews that we did, that those young people for whom their parents were able to, their parents had the knowledge, the lived experience in some cases, because they'd been through financial situations that they wanted to ensure that their young people didn't repeat, and the confidence to be talking about finances with their young people. Lots of young people have that level of support, but then there are a lot of young people who said, we just haven't had this conversation at home at all. And if these young people were saying, we've had very little financial education intervention in school, we might have had one lesson where someone shared some knowledge with us, but they didn't feel adequately prepared. And I'm really interested in that, those young people who aren't getting that provision at home, you know, how do we ensure that what they get is well-rounded, and that the quality they get, and allows them to make those decisions later in the future. And I wondered, Andy, if you had a perspective on this, given you've done lots of work with lower income communities. Do you have, for those young people who may not have, for those young people from those communities, is there a different impact of poor financial literacy, and is there greater need, and how do we address that?
I think the answer is yes, for the obvious reasons that all three of us have already highlighted. The less money you have, the less capacity there is to make mistakes with money, because you lose a few pounds on making a poor decision. You don't eat today if you're on very low incomes. So managing money at the poorest end is absolutely critical to get right. Although, of course, what that does mean to say in a family setting that thinks a little carefully about this, if you're living on a budget and expose children to that fact and share that fact with young people, you can give children just as good an education as somebody who has lots of money, for whom the children never get involved in that decision because mum and dad swipe a card or pay on a phone and money is never transacted. They never see it. It's never part of the discussion. So this isn't just about how do we focus at people at low incomes. People right across the income spectrum have to think carefully about how do you introduce your children to money? How do you give them an understanding of how money can be used to deliver what it is you want to achieve in life, whether you're at a low income or at a high income level. And fortunately, this is recognised at the most senior level within governments. And we haven't mentioned yet the Money and Pension Service, which definitely need a mention here in this process, because anybody who's interested in this area should go check out their website and have a look at what the Money and Pension Service are doing. The Money and Pension Service is part of the DWP, the Department of Work and Pensions, and they have the remit at a national level for developing financial well-being, personal financial well-being in the UK, and have actually just in the process of launching a new strategy for the next 10 years, a key part of which, one of the 5 pillars of which, is actually delivering meaningful, and they define that very carefully, meaningful financial education for young people, because they recognise this is important. They've actually set themselves a metric of 2 million more young people actually gaining meaningful financial education over the next 10 years, which is fantastic that it's being recognised, and it just needs to be resourced properly to enable that to happen and to be coordinated between the various different organisations. So it doesn't matter whether you're on a low income or a high income. Actually, this is absolutely critical that we get right.
Thank you. I'm just going to apologise at this stage, because I know that my screen quality is getting flickery, so apologies if that's creating any issues for anyone. I just wanted to talk about networks as well, and people not knowing who to ask. So again, some of the young people we spoke to, there was a woman, so early 20s, child, works in the care sector, works part-time, who said, no one really explained to me. They told me what taxes were, but they didn't really explain to me how taxes applied to me and the paychecks I might receive. So I work part-time, and therefore it's harder for me to understand my tax brackets and what tax I will need to understand what tax I'm paying, to understand national insurance, etc. And feeling as though, to quote, it was her stupid fault that she didn't know. She felt like she should know, or that somebody probably told her and she couldn't remember, but she couldn't remember them telling her, but just wasn't sure where to go to. And a number of the people we spoke to, those with much less confidence, and particularly those who didn't feel they could go to their parents, felt very isolated. It sort of felt as though they were excluded from a group. Another young person at university made a quote like, such as, the other people at university are posher, so they understand this stuff, and a real sense of being excluded from a group, and therefore not knowing who to turn to and what support networks to reach into, which I think, again, this is probably something that's very familiar to you, but is another thing we need to think about, is how do we ensure that those people do have a place to turn to, or have the information to enable them to make the right decisions. David, one thing I wanted to come on to is the increasing financial complexity of the financial landscape, and the increasing complexity. And again, the young people we spoke to were saying, it starts when you're 16 and you don't know what a national insurance number is, and the card arrives and you put it away, but you never really know why you have to keep giving that number. But when they're referencing credit scores and loan companies and loan sharks and all sorts of the complexity of all the different products available and the products available for the things they require at each stage of their life. Now, how does this increasing financial complexity impact on the financial literacy and capabilities that we should be developing in our young people?
Well, it makes it more challenging. There's no doubt about that. You know, I think that there's no escaping from the fact that it is a very, very complex area. You know, I mean, I'll take pensions as an example. You know, you pretty well need a degree in financial literacy to really understand the complexities of pensions, particularly as you approach sort of retirement and start to think about how you're going to use that pot. And I think, you know, the corollary of this is the challenge for the government is that actually a lot of the support that they give is through the tax regime. So they make certain sort of savings products or services more tax efficient, but in doing that, make it more complex. You know, the tax-free regime on savings has got increasingly more complex as it's got more generous. So there's the challenge, is that actually, you know, a few years ago you could only save, I think it was £9,000 over sort of 5 years in a what was a TESA, you know, tax-free savings. Now you can save £20,000 a year, but you've got cash ISAs and equity ISAs and lifetime ISAs, and they, you know, as the government tries to encourage people to engage more with saving, they layer complexity into it and make it more complicated, more difficult for people to understand. So I think it's a massive challenge from that perspective. And I think really the only way to break through is you do have to simplify it down as much as possible to a number of principles for people to consider, almost this sort of the 3, 4, 5 tick boxes. If I've done these things, then I'm going to be, you know, I'm not going to go awry effectively. You know, the role of fees and charges on savings has an enormous impact that people don't understand. You know, somebody will say, well, you only pay 1% fee on this, so it's very cheap. You look at the impact of a 1% charge on a savings pot, it can reduce your returns by about 50% over a long period of time. So there is a lot of complexity. It makes it much more challenging. I absolutely agree. The more the government tries to help by encouraging people with tax efficiency, it gets more complicated. The industry itself in product innovation makes things more difficult, and I don't think that's going to go away, but I do think it's a challenge, and I think that the only way to sort of navigate effectively through that is to have organizations like yours that stick to some basic principles, which means that if you stay with these 5 things, you're not really going to go far off the path. And I think that's also part of the challenge, is in helping support financial literacy and capability, as Andy says, is the secret is to try and make it as simple as possible, because it is complex, and I don't think it's going to get any less complex. So the challenge sits with the educators and the informers to try and simplify it. You know, and I think what's interesting is that you're starting to see that increasingly on social media and places like YouTube. You know, there is a host of people now setting themselves up as finance gurus. You know, and as somebody who knows this stuff pretty well inside out, another part of that challenge is there's some really good ones out there, and there's some people who frankly talk a load of rubbish. So being able to decipher when you're on YouTube as to whether this is a really good influencer who talks a lot of sense versus somebody who just likes getting hits and likes and subscribers, I think is another part of the challenge. So long answer to it, really difficult. It is complex, it is challenging, it's not likely to get any easier. But I think we need to focus on a small number of key principles that if you follow these principles, you can't go too far wrong. I think you've gone on to mute, Catherine.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, great, sorry. If I just want to say to audience members, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, please do ask them via the question function on your screen, and we'll come to those shortly. So how do we prepare young people for these uncertain futures? Andy, Russell, I wondered if you had a perspective on, in this increasingly complex financial landscape, what do we need to do to prepare these young people for their futures?
Well, from my side, and I'm sure Andy's got lots of great thoughts on this. From my side, I think it is about providing opportunities for young people to begin that development. I was just thinking, as David was speaking, I think I absolutely agree that the level of complexity has increased vastly, but so has money and finance itself. If you think about that kind of cognitive development of a young person, where they're beginning to recognise what money is and what it's used for, we know that that's about 3 years old. But you think about the journey around a supermarket where you might sit in a trolley, go round, someone's filling up the basket, they go through the checkout, they might ask for cash back, and then they tap their card. And from that 3-year-old's perspective, you've just wandered around, filled your trolley, and the cashier's giving you £50 and you've walked out. That's, we're not talking, or most of us are not talking about what sits behind that. You've not just been given £50 for your shopping. It's your money. You've acquired that money somehow, probably through work. That money is sat in an account. There's a transaction. We do need to start having those conversations, because it's become more and more abstract. Cybercrime is another very good example for young people. I think young people under the age of 18 they are growing at the fastest rate in relation to cybercrime, and that's quite scary. And it's being provided with those opportunities to understand what these scams are, how to recognize those scams, what to do when you find these scams landing in your inbox, or text message or phone calls. And they've been happening an awful lot over the last 18 months since the pandemic really stepped up a gear. So for me, it's all about providing those opportunities, whether it's in the home, whether it's in school, but it's those opportunities to learn. And at the moment, I don't think we have, and Andy used a very pertinent terminology, meaningful. We don't have consistent, meaningful financial education, and we need that to become embedded and normal for every young person to have received it, and to be able to address some of these growing challenges as and when they crop up.
Thank you. I'm really pleased you raised that point, because I think that's a very important one. And again, we saw it through the research where young people are saying, I had one lesson on something to do with finance. So someone, and it was different for everybody. Someone had a lesson on mortgages, somebody had a lesson on savings, someone had a lesson on, different topics. But it sounded like a one-off exercise, and we know how packed the school curriculum is. We understand we understand the school context. That's what we do day in, day out. I completely understand the school context. But what we want this to be is a journey through financial education for young people. And that's why we as EverFi offer a number of different courses aimed at different age groups for financial education, because we do want people to just keep coming back to it and be able to reflect on it and have that knowledge and those knowledge and skills at the right moment. Andy, I wanted to come on to a question which I think is really important in the current context. Why now? Why is financial education, after the 1.5 years we've had, why is it so important that we address this, we collectively address this, and improve the quality and the amount of financial education that young people are receiving?
It's absolutely essential that we recognise this problem. We're not doing anything about it. I was looking at some statistics recently that said of the looking at who's most exposed, who's most at risk with financial lack of resilience, lack of ability to be able to cope with a financial shock that might happen to them, the 18 to 24-year-olds are the worst. Apparently there's 25% of 18 to 24-year-olds have less than £100 in savings at the moment. So very little has to go wrong in their life for suddenly they're in a position where their outgoings are more than their income, and they have a problem. So whatever it is we're doing, it's not working. So we've got to think fundamentally differently about how we actually approach delivering financial education, allowing it to sort of happen by accident, hoping that parents are good, excuse me, hoping that carers can deliver something that's appropriate, hoping that children will somehow pick it up via osmosis from YouTube and be able to, as David highlights, figure out which ones are the good pieces of advice from the poor pieces of advice. It's just not going to happen. We need a structured way to engage with this. And I think, as you said, whatever FI is doing, and a number of other organizations that do similar things, to actually really try and provide a framework for schools to find the space to be able to do this. We know how difficult it is to fit this in the curriculum. They're very carefully managed, how the curricula works, and teachers spend huge amounts of time making sure they do the best that they can for young people, and financial education gets squeezed for all the reasons we understand, because there's other stuff that's important that they're taught about in schools as well. Parents finding an opportunity to engage with this is really difficult to do. But if we don't do it, this problem is going to get worse, not better, for all the reasons that Russell and David have highlighted. Financial context is not getting simpler. Scams are getting cleverer. The ability to be able to manage money, to have your identity stolen is increasing. So we have to find new ways of doing this. Although I think that actually digital can help us solve some of these problems, not just create some of these problems. And actually, some of the research work that was done by the Money and Pension Service indicated that most of the interventions that are going on at the moment, most of the things we're talking about, are face-to-face things within schools. They are parents doing things, and very little is actually digitally structured, and very little is presented in a digital form. That means young people can explore it themselves. A lot of young people are quite capable of being able to go and build their own understandings if you provide them with a framework and make sure they're being pointed in the right direction to trusted support. And so finding ways of building good digital solutions, I think that we haven't mentioned just in time yet. I mean, we all know that one of the most effective ways of learning things isn't to learn something now and then 4 years later think, well, what was it that teacher told me in a classroom 4 years ago about a mortgage? I don't remember. Yeah, we actually need just in time information. We need to be able to access it at the point at which I need to make a financial decision. That needs to be given the right foundations. People need to learn how to manage and manipulate money, but they also need to know where to go get that information just at the point in time at which they need to access it. So trusted frameworks, I think, are really important, and digital actually not only creates a problem, I think could also help us solve some of that problem if we get it right, if we coordinate it, if we use the sorts of willingness that we see from organizations like all of us are representing here today, to try and coordinate that in a sensible way, maybe through the government, through the Money and Pension Service, or other similar things. But there's some great resources out there. There's not a shortage of resources. It's a shortage of being able to access that and target it in the right way.
Thank you. And yeah, we know that's something we completely agree with, that digital is what schools want, and also it enables you to, it's one of the things schools want. It also enables you to test and develop young people's knowledge as well. It's not just talking at them, but it's allowing them to, test and explore things themselves at their own pace as well. I've got a question here, Andy. Please keep your questions coming, audience. Really keen to hear what you have to say. Sorry, David, a question for you. What role can businesses play in ensuring that financial education is available to all?
So, not surprisingly, I think a very important role. I think I would sort of categorize the way that businesses can support in two ways. From a sort of provision perspective, as a financial services provider, we completely agree with a number of the points that Andy just made around making sure that we utilize digital technology and capability to present what we do in a very, very different way. We're very excited later this year, where we are going to launch a Beehive Money Savings app. And what that will do for the first time, it will combine savings with learning about what you need to do to buy your first home. So I mentioned earlier, we have 60,000 people saving with us and licensed to buy their first home. That's why they're saving with us. It's really clear. And then what we will do with the app is that we will introduce them to all of the concepts of the preparation that they will need to go through to get a mortgage, to understand what a mortgage is, and even to help them get their credit score ready. So these are sorts of digital capabilities that are now available if you put them together to meet Andy's sort of challenge of just in time. I'm saving to buy my first home. I've sort of flagged that up with you because I'm saving an ELISA. Well, we'll allow them to set up savings goals. We'll educate them through the provision of the app. So there's a new world there that's open to us once we've engaged with somebody to present what we do in a very, very different way. And I think it's part of the industry's responsibility to start to think about that and use the amazing advantages that digital brings to provide that education. So I think there's a lot that can be done in that space. We're certainly setting out to do that. And then I think the second sort of part is supporting organisations like you to take awareness and financial education and capability to younger people. We've worked for a long time with Russell's organisation, sort of delivering entrepreneurship and financial capability to thousands of youngsters in schools up and down our heartland. So I think there's a responsibility for business to support organisations like yourselves to meet that challenge, to provide resources, whether that's in terms of sort of funding or actually it's volunteering time from our staff. So one of the most sort of positive things that we've had through our engagement, particularly with Young Enterprise, is providing business mentors to firms. And there's an enormous benefit for staff. They get a great deal out of that and learn a lot about coaching and mentoring on the way through. So, you know, I think there are benefits for a business to support. But I think, you know, it's very clear, it's very important. We need to be focused on how we educate through the provision of our products even more, using the advantages of digital, and to sort of continue to support the work that organisations like Young Money and FFI do. And we also sort of support local councils. You know, we've delivered numerical literacy to 6,500 families in Nottingham City Council area. The basic stuff to get people off and running so that they can, you know, do the basic addition. So it doesn't just have to be the complex stuff and understanding pension law. It can be the basics. The responsibility is really clear. There's clearly the need, you know, and organisations like ours, particularly who are owned by their members, it's really, really important that we're seen to be fulfilling that.
Thank you. An interesting question here from the audience. So if speed is of the essence, which it sounds like, you know, we've been talking about, the moment is now, can agile disruptors and fintechs help, considering how tech savvy young people are? So thinking about young people themselves and the skill sets they have, and is there, you know, how can agile disruptors and fintechs help? Who would like to take that?
Yeah, I'm happy to say it. I think the answer is yes. I think young people, not all young people, so we have to remember that we can't put everybody in the same basket. Not every young person is tech savvy, but they are that digital generation. Absolutely, we should be looking at a range of solutions. There isn't one solution to this, and neither is there for parents or for teachers. They need to be given a suite of tools, resources, a toolkit which they can draw on, and the same can be said for a young person. You know, some of them will engage with a textbook, some of them engage with online learning, some of them will engage with an app which helps them to save, you know, and what David was speaking about. I think that's it. We need to provide that breadth of provision so that the young people themselves, as do the teachers and the parents, can choose what's going to work best for them and inform them most appropriately. The other thing I was just going to mention, because it hasn't cropped up yet, but in terms of why now, why what's the burning platform? There is this product, which I'm sure many of the audience will know, the Child Trust Fund, which has been maturing for the last 18 months or so, and will continue to do so for 7 years, where nearly every single young person turning 18 will receive a lump sum of money. Now, on average, I think that's calculated to be somewhere around £1,500. And one of the barriers to financial education, even that just-in-time financial education, has been sometimes you're talking about savings and investments and products that require you to have money when the young people in the group do not have money. Well, for the very, very first time, and for this window of 7 years, we can pretty much guarantee that the majority will be in receipt of some money come 18, and they need to be thinking about how they use that money. And I think that's a really interesting sort of stimulus that we've just never had before, and we should be making more of it within schools, youth groups, at home. And we've only got the next 7 years or so before it will not be everybody. Just wanted to add that in.
That's great, thank you. And it actually leads me really onto the final section for me, which is I want us to provide our audience with some practical advice that would help to boost the financial literacy levels for young people. So I'm going to ask each of us, me included, I'll go last, to just provide one piece of practical advice that we think it's worth considering when thinking about how we boost those financial literacy levels. Andy, I'm going to start with you this time.
Can I have a couple? Can I get away with a couple?
A quick couple. Oh yeah.
The Money and Pension Service have got some great advice for schools and parents. Four things they say, and I'll say them very quickly. Start early. Number one. Use experiential learning. Find opportunities to learn by doing. Yeah. Use everyday events to talk about money. Don't always make it a special thing, but talk about it when it comes up. So it's part of a context, because that's the best way to learn. And involve parents and carers and trusted others to give that, youth workers or whoever a young person can trust, to be able to build that framework so that they've got people they know they can go talk to when they face particular challenges, because they've got somebody they can trust. So you only asked for one, but there's 4 things for you.
Thank you. No, that's great. Makes it harder for each of the next of us. So who's got David, do you want to go next? No, it's great. They're brilliant. David.
I think I'll probably keep it very, very simple, and that is, don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to actually be clear that you don't understand. There is nothing wrong with that. It is a difficult and challenging and complex area. It's one that people do need to understand. So start by being clear that it doesn't matter that I don't understand, and I've got the courage to say, please explain.
Great, thank you. And I think probably that point, I imagine you're thinking about not just young people, but parents, teachers, anybody within the system, so that we can build everybody's confidence in order to build the knowledge base of those young people.
Anybody and everybody.
Thank you. Russell.
I think it builds a little on Andy's, but it's to make it real, make it real and relevant. And if you're a teacher, some of the very, very best financial education I've ever seen delivered has been through drama, where they got young people to role play different circumstances and to consider what the implications of that situation were. But you can deliver financial education through maths. I mean, it really makes maths relevant. If you give maths a real context, then suddenly there's a higher degree of engagement with that maths, because it means something to you. You can deliver it through geography, through history, through science. That is how we need financial education embedding, because you're never going to get 2 hours a week on the curriculum to deliver money and finance. But what you can do is you can provide a real context through maths and science and English and other subject areas that you pull together to form that provision. And at home, make it real. And we've spoken lots about having those money discussions at whatever level that is and whatever level you're comfortable, but engage those young people with the reality of what keeping a household is. And it's budgeting. In some cases, it's literally putting money into jam jars on the mantelpiece. involve those young people, because if you keep it real and relevant, then for them it means far more than something that's abstract and unreal.
That's great, thank you. So I'm actually going to change the rules here and reiterate some of the points you made, because that collectively they're so important. So keep it relevant to young people, as you said, relevant to their lives. Scenarios work brilliantly. Keep it real, as you say. I'd written those exact words. It's great to hear you say that. Fun as well. This has to be a process that they enjoy being part of, because it'll not only make it more memorable, but it'll make them want to learn more, and to go home and talk about it as well. A point that somebody raised earlier: don't just tell. Don't just say this is the situation, this is what a mortgage is, or this is what savings are. Allow them to explore it, to test their own knowledge, to develop it through games, and just to make it much more, as you said, Andy, experiential, but also just to test that they are developing that knowledge base. And I think an important point for the context of this discussion as well is remember that the lives of every young person is different. It's very easy in creating these programs and products to think that everybody has that support network at home, or that everybody has people that they can turn to, but really ensure that those who may potentially feel excluded do feel part of this and feel as though actually this is relevant to my life and the role that money plays within my home life. And fine, so all that it goes for me to say now is a huge thank you, firstly to the panelists. This has been a really, I think, important and interesting discussion about financial literacy, and thinking about how we engage those and don't further disadvantage those who may already feel disadvantaged for some reason in society. And our aim is that we want every young person to be receiving a robust financial literacy programme that isn't a one-off, but is embedded into their education, both at school and at home, and builds their knowledge, skills, confidence, and gives them the tools to, as you said, Andy, at the right points in their life to be able to make the right decisions. If you'd like to talk to us further, please do get in touch to find out more about what we do, and the impact that we've had. But yeah, the final two things I want to say is a huge thank you to our panelists. I think the perspectives and experiences brought have been really interesting, and we've covered a plethora of topics, even in the introduction. But today I hope that audience members can take away some of those key and pertinent points about what the impact is and what we can each do to address these, and why we should be addressing these now, given the current context societally. And finally, once again, thank you to the audience. Really appreciated you joining us, the questions you've asked. It's, thank you again. Monday morning after a big final, it's a big ask. So thank you very, very much for your contribution and for joining us today. So that's everything. Thank you. Have a great rest of week, and look forward hopefully to engaging with you on this subject in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.